They say the most dangerous thing you can build in a corporation is something so good that the people above you become threatened by it. Not because it's bad, because it's too good, because it proves that the limits they've imposed are arbitrary, because it makes everything else look small. Pontiac's engineers understood this better than almost anyone in Detroit. They had spent a decade building performance cars that General Motors' corporate structure had explicitly tried to prevent, circumventing displacement limits, finding technical loopholes in corporate policy, and producing vehicles that defined an entire era of American performance. They were very good at working inside a system that didn't want them to succeed. Then they built the Ram Air V, and General Motors didn't just disapprove, they buried it. Not because it failed, because it worked perfectly, and that was the problem. This is the explosive truth behind Pontiac's banned Ram Air V engine. The most advanced engine Pontiac ever built, the one that almost won a national racing championship, and the one that General Motors ordered destroyed before most people ever knew it existed. To understand why the Ram Air V happened, you have to understand the political environment inside General Motors during the 1960s. The corporation had signed on to the AMA's 1957 Automobile Manufacturers Association Agreement, which was supposed to end factory participation in racing. In practice, it meant that GM's racing programs had to exist without official acknowledgement. No press releases, no factory funding listed in annual reports, no executives photographed near race cars. Then there were the internal displacement limits. In 1963, General Motors Corporate issued a directive. No car smaller than a full size could be equipped with an engine exceeding 330 cubic inches. The reasoning was insurance costs, liability, and a general concern that the performance arms race was generating regulatory attention that could threaten the company's ability to operate normally. The practical effect was that Pontiac, which had built the muscle car category from nothing with the 1964 GTO, was being told to stop. Pontiac's response, designed largely by Chief Engineer John DeLorean, was to find every possible way to maximize performance within whatever limits corporate set. When the limit was 326 cubic inches, they developed the best 326 cubic inch engine they could. When the limit moved, they moved with it. And when the limit was eventually revised to allow 400 cubic inches in intermediate cars, a concession driven by competitive reality, Pontiac went to work on the 400 with the same intensity they'd applied to everything that came before. The Ram Air program had been building toward the 5 designation since 1967. Understanding what the Ram Air V was requires understanding the evolution that led to it. The Ram Air 1 and 2 were essentially the standard 400 cubic inch HO engine with a functional cold air induction system that routed outside air directly into the carburetor. Colder, denser air meant more oxygen per combustion cycle, which meant more power. The concept was straightforward, the execution was effective, and the factory claimed 360 horsepower in the Ram Air 2 configuration, which, by the understated standards of the era, meant considerably more than 360 horsepower in reality. The Ram Air 3 and 4 arrived for 1969, and here the program began to diverge from conventional development. The Ram Air 4 featured a specific camshaft profile, longer duration, higher lift, that moved the engine's power band decisively upward in the RPM range. In combination with revised cylinder heads that improved airflow, the Ram Air 4 produced power numbers that tested at well above the factory's conservative 370 horsepower rating. Car and Driver tested a Ram Air 4 GTO in 1969 and recorded a 13.9 second quarter mile at 107 miles per hour in near-stock configuration. The engine was pulling hard, right to the red line in a way that conventional 400 cubic inch V8s simply didn't. The Ram Air 5 took everything the 4 had achieved and rebuilt it from the cylinder head down. The defining characteristic of the Ram Air 5 was its cylinder head design. Pontiac's engineers developed what they called tunnel port heads, a configuration where the intake ports ran nearly straight through the cylinder head, with minimal bends between the intake manifold and the combustion chamber. The ports were round in cross-section rather than the conventionally shaped rectangular passages used in standard cylinder heads, and they were larger than anything Pontiac had run in production. The design concept was the same principle Ford had applied to the 427 Cammer cylinder head. Eliminate the direction changes in the intake tract. Eliminate the turbulence those changes create, and let the engine breathe as efficiently as physics allows. To implement tunnel port heads, Pontiac's engineers had to completely rethink the intake manifold. Conventional intake manifolds can't connect directly to round ports that run straight into the head. The geometry doesn't work. The Ram Air V used a special intake manifold designed specifically around the tunnel port arrangement, with separate runners that fed each cylinder without interruption. The result was an engine that on a flow bench moved substantially more air per unit of time than the Ram Air 4 at equivalent valve lift. The camshaft was ground to specifications that made the Ram Air 4's aggressive profile look mild. Duration was extended, lift was increased, and the overlap, the period when both intake and exhaust valves are briefly open simultaneously, was pushed to the point where the engine was genuinely difficult to drive below 3,500 revolutions per minute. This was not a street engine in any conventional sense. It idled roughly, pulled poorly at low speed, and came alive in a way that most drivers of the era weren't prepared for once the tachometer climbed past 4,000. Factory rating, 500 horsepower. 500 horsepower in a car that Pontiac sold to the public in 1969. The Ram Air 5's primary application was not the street. Pontiac had developed it simultaneously as a 400 cubic inch street option and a destroked 303 cubic inch racing engine for the SCCA Trans-Am Series, America's premier road racing championship for production-based cars. The Trans Am Series required competitors to use engines displacing 305 cubic inches or less, which meant the full 400 cubic inch Ram Air 5 had to be reduced in displacement for racing purposes. The 303 cubic inch version achieved this through a shorter stroke while maintaining the tunnel port heads, the aggressive camshaft, and the fundamental architecture that made the design exceptional. In race trim, with proper carburation, exhaust, and tuning, the 303 was producing 450 to 480 horsepower from an engine that displaced less than the street version of the Boss 302 Mustang it competed against. The Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, named after the racing series itself, was the intended recipient of this engine. The irony is profound enough that it almost sounds invented. Pontiac built a car and named it after a racing championship, developed a purpose-built engine to win that championship, and then had the engine destroyed before either the car or the engine could compete at the level both were designed for. The Firebird Trans Am became one of the most famous muscle cars in history. The engine that was supposed to make it fast became one of the most obscure. General Motors' 1970 performance ban was comprehensive and final. No multi-carburetor setups except on the Corvette. No dealer performance packages, no factory backing for racing programs. The corporate structure that had tolerated Pontiac's performance development for most of the 1960s, officially disapproving while privately allowing it to continue, drew a hard line. The Ram Air 5 program was a direct casualty. The engine had been developed, tested, and was in various stages of limited production when the corporate directive arrived. Pontiac's engineers had already sold a small number of 400 cubic inch Ram Air 5 engines through dealers. Estimates range from 12 to 15 complete engines reaching customers before the program was shut down. The 303 racing engines existed in even more limited numbers. Most of what had been built was recalled or destroyed. The men who built the engine understood what was being lost. Mac McKellar, who had been central to Pontiac's engine development through the performance era, and the engineering team that had spent years developing the tunnel port head configuration, watched a program that represented years of legitimate technical advancement get canceled, not because it had failed, but because the corporate environment had changed in a direction that made success a liability. Pontiac never built another engine remotely comparable. The performance division that had invented the muscle car category, that had produced the GTO and the Ram Air Series and the Firebird, began a long decline from that point forward. The engines that came after the ban were competent, and some were genuinely fast, but none of them carried the technical ambition of the Ram Air V. The tunnel port heads were never revised and reintroduced. The 303 racing engine was never developed into something that could have won the Trans Am championship it was built for. The Ram Air. 5 engines that survived, the street-legal 400 cubic inch examples that made it into customer hands before the recall, are among the rarest and most valuable Pontiac drivetrain components in existence. Documented examples with verifiable histories have traded for figures that make even well-optioned GTOs and Firebirds look affordable. The engines are rare enough that their existence in a specific car is considered a significant authentication challenge. The documentation required to prove a Ram Air V is genuine is extensive, because the number of fraudulent claims has historically exceeded the number of genuine units by a considerable margin. In Trans Am racing, Pontiac's absence with a competitive engine left the field to Ford's Boss 302 and Chevrolet's Z28, both excellent engines, but both engines that the Ram Air V 303 would have challenged directly had it been allowed to compete. The Trans Am championship that the Firebird Trans Am was named after was won in 1969 by Mark Donohue, driving a Penske Camaro Z28. Penske's operation is one of the most sophisticated in American racing history. They won with what they had because what Pontiac had built was sitting in a warehouse waiting for corporate approval that never came. What the Ram Air V represents, beyond its technical specifications and its rarity, is the moment when Pontiac stopped. The division that had defined performance for a decade reached its limit, not because the engineering ran out of ideas, but because the institution it operated within decided that performance was no longer the priority. The Ram Air V was the last signal that Pontiac's engineers sent before the frequency was turned off. General Motors killed the most advanced engine Pontiac ever built. They did it on purpose. They did it completely, and they never explained why to the engineers who built it or the customers who would have bought it. The 12 to 15 people who received a Ram Air V engine through a Pontiac dealer before the ban are in possession of something that wasn't supposed to exist. That's the explosive truth behind the engine GM doesn't want you to know about.